Hey, what's up guys? Welcome back. Today we're getting back to work on this homemade guitar kit. Big shout out, of course, to Michael Perry who made this thing and sent it to me. Super cool. I wish I could do this at home. I can't. What we're gonna do today is dye our quilted maple top. So in the last video on this one, you will have seen me do my shaping work to the body. I changed the outline a little bit. I gave it some carves and stuff to make it a little more comfortable, beveled a little bit of the front, all that kind of fun stuff. Now, normally I would do the neck next, and I do any shaping work on that. And there is some to do. The neck itself is a little wider than the fretboard, which is cool. It gives me some room to play with. You can see the neck joint's actually not bad. It's got some gaps in it, but it's tight, which is nice. And if I spray some finish in there, it's gonna be really tight. However, like I said, it's got some gaps in it, so I might end up gluing this in. The neck is particularly a little wider than the fretboard at the bottom, which is good for that joint, but kind of an unusual thing to have happen. So it won't affect playability or anything. I'm deciding what to do about that. And further, I don't know if you guys have any tips for this. The whole thing is set up such that, and this isn't surprising because it was made at home, but set up such that the fretboard's at a bit of an angle, and that's fine. I can shave the sides down, but you can't get straight string pull to the tuning pegs because, for example, the low E tuning peg is kind of over where the A would be, and everything is more vertical, so they don't quite extend all the way out to there either. I guess they're all going to come in a little bit, which is kind of interesting. I don't think it'll have a substantial effect on tuning stability. Of course, when you look at, for example, a Gibson Les Paul, they don't have any straight string pull, so it's kind of an ideal that nobody really needs to achieve. I've just never quite seen a setup like that on this type of headstock, so I'm going to have to decide if I need to do anything about that or if that's good the way it is. But I digress. We're not worrying about the neck right now, and that's why we're not worrying about it, because there are some things on here that I'm going to need to think about what I want to do about. What we are going to worry about is that beautiful quilted top, because that is going to be a hell of a lot of fun to do. So what I'm thinking I'm going to do on this one is just spray a nice opaque black over. Sorry, just kidding. All right, so for this one, what we're going to do is accent the grain first, because we can. It's a nice thick cap. It's not like the veneers that I've done mostly for you guys. So we're going to accent that first, and then we're going to go in with some color. Now, I'm going to use black to accent it. You don't have to use black. In fact, in a lot of cases, it's not even a good idea to use black, but I'm going for a very high contrast, kind of a very dramatic look. So I'm going to dye this whole thing using one of my favorite dyes, Bellin's Solar Lux NGR Dye Stain. I'm going to do this all in black, and then I'm going to sand it back, leaving the edges, these cutaway parts, I'm going to leave those dyed black. Pardon me, and then sand the front back so that I get an accent on this beautiful grain pattern. Then I'm going to go in with yellow, same type of stain, yellow, bring that out, and then we're going to leave it there for this video, but when we come in at the end to do our finishing, I'm going to mix some of that same dye with lacquer, and I'll be able to spray a vignette, a sunburst, using that. So I can actually use that dye to tint my lacquer. I'm going to use Bellin's stringed instrument lacquer. It's actually, maybe I'll use Bellin's Quilted lacquer. Regardless, it's all compatible, no problems there, and that's going to be a really easy way to get a nice, a nice look on this. What the hell is it called? A nice burst. A nice burst look on this, and with this interesting pattern, I think it's going to be pretty cool. So let's go ahead and get to work on dyeing this. I'm going to throw on some gloves because this stuff will stain your fingers for days, and I'll look stupid showing up at my other job with hands that are dyed black. We'll get that first coat on there. It dries within a matter of seconds, honestly, so I'm going to go fire up my compressor right now so that I can sand it back once it's on there pretty much. And yeah, let's get to work. So I'm starting in with my Solar Lux Black here. I'm just using a shop towel for it because this wood is very smooth If you're working on a rougher wood, you're going to probably want to use a rag. You can get fibers sitting and like staying behind and rubbing off onto your project if you're not careful, but because this is a very smooth piece that I'm working on, it's not an issue here, so I can get away with just using this disposable shop towel, no problem. Now, as far as application goes, it really doesn't get any easier than this. I just put a little bit of it on the towel and I wipe it on. The product goes really far. I've hardly use any of it to do something like this. And I can just overlap areas that I think are maybe a little too light. It all blends in nicely. Again, it doesn't get much easier than doing this. So all I've got to do is wipe this all over the top here and make sure that I do a good job of getting the bevels, because I'm leaving them black, or at least at this point I think I am. And then go over the top as evenly as possible, but even if it's not perfect, it's not going to really matter, because in order to do the accenting technique here, our next step essentially is going to be to go in with a sander and take some of this off again. So if your first dye run isn't particularly even, well, not the end of the world. You can already see how that black is starting to accent the grain, because it's getting in and creating darker areas where the grain is more open, and leaving lighter areas where the grain is more closed and hasn't absorbed as much of the dye. So we're already starting to get that accented look, and now we're going to go in and sand off the areas that haven't soaked in as far, so those closed grain areas are going to lighten up again. And essentially you can decide how far you want to go with this. You can take off just a little bit of the dye if you want, or you can sand back really far and make sure that the dye is only left in those very open grain areas. It's all just a matter of what effect you're looking for, and this is something that you'll get more accustomed to with practice, but really it's fairly easy and something you can probably get right on your first try. If you sand back too far and you want it darker, just dye it again and sand it again. So I'm going for a look that involves a little bit more light area, so I sand back reasonably far here, not crazy, and this is what I'm left with. You can see how well accented that grain is. You can see all of those beautiful patterns coming in. In a minute I'm going to go in and clean off any of the excess dust and kind of wet this a little bit, and that gives you a better look at what it would look like with a finish on it, and really ups that contrast. As you can see there, the contrast goes way up when you wet it a little bit. I'm just using something that evaporates quickly so that I don't have to worry about any kind of swelling. And like I said, you can really start to see that beautiful quilted maple pattern, that three-dimensional look coming through now. So at this point, I move on to my color, which in this case is yellow. You're going to notice kind of a nice toxic look, if you will, which is kind of what I was going for here. And as I started to see it, it became more and more what I was going for. But that's kind of the combination, the look that you're going to end up with if you use black as an accent color and then you go in with something light, like a light yellow or green. You can use a different color to accent. It doesn't have to be black, obviously, and I think I already mentioned that. Something like a brown, for example, for yellow is going to produce a much more natural look, and something maybe a little prettier if you're not into this kind of toxic look that I've got going here. But personally, I like this more aggressive look, particularly for what I would say is a more aggressive body style, like the shape that this guitar has. So you can see my top darkening a little bit as I go over it again with the yellow. These transparent colors, of course, as you continue to go over them, even if they're a light color, they can only darken, so they'll darken a little bit. And this is what I'm left with after that first round of color. I think that is looking pretty cool. You've still got that black accenting in there showing through this transparent yellow dye, and we really get that cool figure pattern coming out. God, that's a beautiful piece of wood. Now, this next step is optional, and essentially it's a repeat. So what I'm doing is I'm sanding back again, using some of the yellow as an accent to improve contrast now, because some of that'll stay on there. I'm not sanding back as far as I did last time, and then I'm going to go over it again with the yellow. What I'm also doing here, and you'll notice I'm being more careful, more targeted with my sander, is I'm creating my burst pattern. I'm creating my vignette with the sander by just sanding away and lightening up in the middle. So as you sand it, you're going to lighten it as the layers darken, or layer up rather, they're going to darken. So when I pull off that layer in the middle, I'm going to go in and dye the whole thing again. And when I do that, it's going to darken everything. So I'm going to end up with that burst pattern. So here I am just cleaning it off again. Again, you can see that beautiful accented grain when you get it just a little bit wet with something like this. This looks really cool in and of itself, but of course I want more of that color on there, so I go back in and put another layer onto the entire project. You can see how that unfolds now, and I'm quite happy with how this turned out. Well, I'm actually super happy with that. That kind of, you know, toxic yellow greenish effect that you get when you put the yellow over top of the black. You saw me sand away the middle because as you layer this stuff, it darkens and darkens up to a certain point, but these transparent colors only darken themselves. They never get lighter, obviously. So when I sanded away the center to give that vignette burst type effect and then went over everything again, it darkened the outside and gave me this really cool look. So that is how I do my accenting for quilted, flamed, any kind of figured maple. That's what I do generally. Another option is to do that first step with the black, sand it back like I did, and then instead of wiping on a dye, you go ahead and move straight to that spray on method. In that case, you would seal first and then do your spray. There is an advantage and a disadvantage to that. The disadvantage is it's more difficult and it gives kind of a different look, a little bit deeper. But the advantage is you seal first, you spray that on, and if you don't like it, you just sand it off. This stuff I could sand off, but eventually, in order to do that, I gotta sand back right into my wood, and eventually you go too far and you're out of wood. So you can only try it so many times. You can do it with that transparent spray over top of the sealer as many times as you want. You just keep sanding it off, spraying it again, and you're never actually going to affect the shape of the wood. A little bit of an advantage there. It's also very easy to get even, but this is a great product and is fairly easy to get even regardless, as you will have seen here. I didn't dilute it or anything, I just put it straight on, wiped it around, no problem. So that's how you do this quilted maple. I hope you guys enjoyed the video. If you did, please feel free to give it a thumbs up and subscribe if you haven't already to see how the rest of this crazy kit goes. If you want to get in touch with Michael about these kits, his contact info will be in the description. Give him a shout. Let him know what you think. Let him know if you want one. Stick around for the rest of the series, and I will see you guys next time. Thanks for watching. Have a good one.